Hello and welcome aboard. In this video lesson, I'm going to discuss rules and tactical considerations so you can navigate Windward Mark roundings with more confidence. Understanding the rules and tactical options allows you to take a more conservative or more aggressive course of action based on your personal risk profile. Understanding the rules helps you avoid penalties and helps you better decide whether it's best to give or take. Let's talk sailing. The sailing instructions for a sailboat race describe the course and marks. The racing rules of sailing define a mark as an object, such as an inflatable buoy, like the ones being towed by this support boat, that the sailing instructions require a boat to leave on a specified side. The entire object, including another object intentionally attached to the object, such as a flag, comprises the mark. However, an anchor line is not part of the mark. When rounding the mark to a specified side, we can't touch the mark. If we do, we'll have to take a single penalty turn. This animation shows the yellow boat rounding the Windward Mark to port. The sailing instructions can require us to round either way, but in this lesson, we'll be rounding the Windward Mark to port. Well before you get to the Windward Mark, you want to be thinking about whether you want to leave the Windward Mark and begin the downwind leg on starboard or port. If you want to leave the mark on port, you'll jibe around the mark. Which side of the downwind course you choose should be the one you think will get you to the next mark fastest. If the wind shifts right during the beat, you can jibe at the mark and sail in a more direct heading to the leeward mark. If you see a big puff of wind coming down one side of the course, you might choose that side of the course so you can sail faster to the leeward mark. Part 2 of the racing rules of sailing applies when boats meet. Sections A and B of Part 2 cover right-of-way and general limitations. Section C of Part 2 adds more requirements when boats meet at marks and obstructions. Section C, marks and obstructions, will be the focus of this lesson. There is a lot going on at this Windward Mark. To the untrained eye, it can seem overwhelming and intimidating, but after I explain the rules and applications during this lesson, we'll come back and dissect this video together, and I'll explain who has mark room, who doesn't, who commits a foul, and who doesn't. But let's start with the basics. Whenever two boats on the same tack approach the Windward Mark, one boat is required to give the other boat mark room. When a boat is entitled to mark room at the mark, the other boat must give that boat room to sail to the mark and room to round or pass the mark without touching the mark. When two boats on the same tack reach the zone at the Windward Mark, the outside overlap boat or the boat clear astern must give the other boat mark room. Mark room turns on as soon as the first boat reaches the zone. In this example, yellow reaches the zone, but blue is overlapped to the inside of her, so yellow must give blue mark room. In this example, maroon reaches the zone outside of green, but green is clear astern, so green must give maroon mark room. When boats are on opposite tacks on a beat to windward, mark room does not apply. Part 2, sections A and B of the racing rules still apply, so the non-right-of-way boat here on port must keep clear of the right-of-way boat on starboard. I've already made reference to the zone and the term overlapped multiple times. Let me explain further. The zone is a circle with the mark at its center, with the radius equal to 3 whole lengths of the boat that is nearest to it. If a 20-foot and a 30-foot boat are approaching the mark, and the 20-foot boat is closest to the mark, the zone is 60 feet from the center of the mark. To determine if boats are overlapped, we can draw an imaginary line that is perpendicular to the center line of the boat through the aftermost point of the boat in normal position. If blue's hull and equipment are completely behind that line, then blue is clear astern and green is clear ahead. If blue is across the line at all, blue and green are overlapped. Keep in mind, the aftermost point can be an outboard engine propeller extending from the stern. Boats are also considered overlapped when a boat between them is overlapped. In this scenario, yellow must give both blue and red mark room because blue is overlapped between yellow and red when yellow reaches the zone. So therefore, yellow is considered overlap to the outside of red and must give red mark room. Once you've been given mark room and have rounded the mark, you must keep clear of right-of-way boats. You have been given mark room when you have rounded the mark and are on a course needed to sail your next leg, and are able to keep clear of an outside right-of-way boat without touching the mark or fouling another boat. In this scenario, yellow rounded a little wide of the mark and turned down into the path of blue. Blue gave yellow mark room, but became the right-of-way boat as the boats left the mark. Yellow didn't keep clear and committed a foul. Yellow could have avoided problems by rounding closer to the mark and always remembering to look over your shoulder before steering down or jibing when rounding the windward mark. Mark room does not apply between a boat approaching the mark and one leaving it, but again, Part 2 Sections A and B of the rules still apply. In this scenario, blue approached the windward mark on port as yellow left the mark on starboard. Mark room does not apply between a boat approaching the mark and one leaving it, so blue on port must keep clear of yellow on starboard. However, a right-of-way boat shall give the non-right-of-way boat room to keep clear when changing course. Yellow is the right-of-way boat and changes course as she rounded the mark and drove down, but didn't give blue room to keep clear and committed a foul. Be sure to pay attention to oncoming boats as you round the windward mark and steer down into traffic. If there is a disagreement over whether overlap existed at the zone, the onus of proof is on the boat that claims to have gained the advantage at the last minute. In this scenario, two boats approach the windward mark on the same starboard tack. As the two boats approach the zone, they are overlapped, but just before the zone, yellow breaks overlap. When yellow reaches the zone, she is clear ahead and blue is clear astern. Rule 18.2 dictates that blue must give yellow mark room, but blue doesn't give mark room and yellow protests. Whenever there is doubt whether overlap existed when the first boat reaches the mark, the onus of proof is always on the boat that claims to have gained the advantage at the last minute. Watching the animation, yellow breaks overlap just before reaching the zone. A good tactical move. Blue arguably should have given yellow mark room. In a protest room, we probably aren't going to have overhead drone video showing whether or not overlap actually existed. So, even though yellow was fouled by blue, yellow will likely not prevail in a protest hearing. Blue is going to get benefit of the doubt because yellow broke overlap at the last minute before entering the zone. Communication with other boats when you reach the zone is optional, but can help avoid misunderstandings, which can help avoid fouls and collisions. Even if two boats agree to disagree as they do in this example, it is helpful to know you disagree before you get to the mark. Knowing the rules and knowing who will get benefit of the doubt in a protest room can help you balance risk versus reward as you decide whether to do penalty turns or take your chances in a protest hearing. If you are entitled to mark room and a boat required to give you mark room does not, and forces you to touch the mark or foul another boat, you do not need to take a penalty. In this scenario, blue does not give yellow mark room and forces yellow to touch the mark. Yellow is not required to take a penalty turn because the rules exonerate you in this situation. In this scenario, two boats enter the zone with both on port tack. Yellow has inside overlap when blue reaches the zone. Blue must give yellow mark room. Here's a slightly different scenario where again two boats are approaching the zone on port tack, except blue is clear ahead at the zone. Typically a boat clear astern must give the boat clear ahead mark room, but mark room does not include room to tack unless the boat is overlapped inside and to windward. So in this scenario, if blue tacks in front of yellow, blue must keep clear of yellow during the tack. Yellow is forced to avoid before blue completes the tack and commits a foul. A common tactical recommendation for a port tack outside boat clear ahead of another port tack inside boat is to steer head to wind so the windward boat is forced to dip your stern. When approaching the windward mark on starboard, we sometimes find ourselves below the ley line, having to choose between trying to pinch up to the mark or safely tacking back above the ley line. Pinching up to the mark from below the ley line is risky. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Boats pinching up to the mark slow down and sometimes stall and can get hung up at the mark. Sometimes there's a chain reaction and multiple boats get hung up at the mark, forcing other boats to take a much wider path around the mark, and sometimes it even forces oncoming boats to take evasive action. When giving mark room to another boat, you must give them room to round the mark and enough room to get around the boats that are hung up at the mark. If you must tack to avoid a pileup at the mark, don't forget that mark room turns off when you sail past head to wind. You might not be able to tack because you can't just tack into oncoming starboard boats. Bailing out below the pileup and circling back around is an option that most people don't consider, but is usually a much better alternative than getting stuck in the pileup and possibly having to do penalty turns when you finally break free. Let's take another look at that very busy windward mark rounding video I promised we'd reference again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause it right there And I want to take a look at that boat that's about ready to tack in the zone and round the Windward Mark, coming in from a port tack right in front of that starboard tacking boat. That is going to be very close, and we're going to find out if a foul is committed. We know that you can't tack in the zone and force an oncoming starboard tack boat to sail above close hold. Is that going to happen? We're going to find out. So that boat clearly avoids. And what we're going to do, 6193 has to take evasive action against 2235. Is a foul committed or not? I'm going to watch the jib of the boat just to the left of that circle. I want to find out whether that jib luffs, because if the jib is trimmed in correctly at close hold and they sail above close hold, that sail is going to luff. Does it luff? Oh yeah, look at that luff. There was a foul there for sure. 2235 definitely committed a foul. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look. There's another boat coming in, 6135, right there behind the mark. I'm going to highlight it there. Here we have another boat coming in, 6135. That's me, by the way. Is going to tack, make a very aggressive, bold tack. But do I commit a foul or do I? Let's find out. The boats are coming in higher than the ley line. I tack in around. No one has to take evasive action. There's no luffing of any jibs. I got lucky. So I made it around the mark without any foul. So you guys can see an example. Now that you know the rules, you can dissect these situations much easier. Thanks for watching. In the description below, I provided links to other helpful videos. If you want to see more rules in action, please subscribe to the channel and get notified when new videos are published. You got this. If you want to sail conservative and avoid trouble at the Windward Mark, avoid entering the zone on port tack, and avoid entering the zone on the starboard ley line below the starboard ley line. And don't be afraid to tack back to the starboard ley line before you reach the zone if you're below that ley line. Also, always look over your left shoulder before turning down or driving after you around the Windward Mark. You'll thank me for that one. With risk can come reward. Knowing the rules helps you sail with more confidence and can help you make better tactical decisions and better manage your risk. Good luck and have fun.